Hi there. So we're talking about misinformation effect. This is a cognitive bias. So they all affect you the same way. Ooh. Well, they're all so familiar, right? Because we know we got them. I mean, they get us, right?
Right. And we live with it because, you know, we've been given some interesting.
Yes, yes. And well, okay, so this particular, I mean, misinformation is, as the name implies, it can be unintentional, it can be intentional. They're different, okay? But this is about what happens to our memory when we are presented with misinformation after an event. So we have an experience and we have a memory of that experience. Now we know, and we've talked about this a bit, that our memories aren't perfect. We're not
because I don't know about yours.
We're not video recorders, you know. Our brains are not perfect recorders like that. So, based on taking that into account, we have a memory, and then later on, somebody can say something about, you know, how they remember something, or they can contradict what we think we saw, what we remember, and that can actually affect our memory. Not just cause us to doubt, but it can actually alter the memory so that later on, when we recall the event, we recall it differently. We recall a blend of what we originally remembered. You know, for example, if we were to be recorded, record a video, this is how I remember the event. And then later, say a day later, we're presented with misinformation about that event by someone else. And then a couple of days after that, record it again. Okay, this is what I remember. And then watch the two recordings. They could be different. We could actually remember differently.
Well, it's like
and be equally convicted.
Well, it's like eyewitnesses on a wreck or a robbery or a crime of some sort.
Exactly.
Because everybody, and then, you know, did you really remember it like that?
Ooh, you just hit a nerve right there, because that's a big piece. We're going to come back to that. But the question, how questions are asked can affect it too.
Right.
So I'm going to put on my reader, so I got a bunch of notes here. Well, yeah, I mean, the entertainment media does portray this in many ways. And eyewitness testimony has been shown, and we're going to talk about that. There's a lady, I'll come back to that, yes. So this basically, this new information is stored, and it distorts the memory of the initial event. That's what.
I can understand.
This happens in family settings. We've experienced this very recently. We've just spent a few days with old friends, and we were, you know, as you do, you tell stories, and, you know, we've known these people for many decades.
Yes.
We'll talk about something that happened 20 years ago, and
40,
and it's like, were you even at the same place? Because we tell the story, we remember it differently, we tell it differently, and it's like, no, it didn't happen like that at all. This happened and that. No, you're wrong, and we're both confident that our memory is accurate, right? So this is an example of this, you know, taking effect in terms of how our memories will change over time. We were both there. We both saw the same thing. Now that's time. So there's other memory effects happening there, but it is still an example of this. There is a researcher, a well-known woman named Elizabeth Loftus. She did the original research on this in the 1970s, and she's a psychological researcher and psychologist. And she's considered one of the most influential authorities on this, and also in false memories. So this work is very relevant to eyewitness testimony. You mentioned that. In fact, her work and her research has been used to alter the way courts handle eyewitness testimony, because it's not as accurate. Now, there's controversy around this too, because, you know, it's possible to take it too far and to discount eyewitness testimony.
Right.
You know, it's still valuable. It may not be to the letter accurate, but to use the research to then say that it's completely worthless would be wrong, and that would be an abuse, right?
Right.
And I'm going to just refer you to if you want to go further, read some of the articles, and it gives them a couple of examples.
I'm sure he'll give you links if you need it.
Yes, I'm going to put links to resources or sources, in the description.
Because he does that.
Okay, and this lady has also been an expert witness about eyewitness testimony and about memory changes like this in some very high-profile court cases, including OJ's trial.
Ooh,
So she's got
that?
some, she's been criticized a bit too. There's been some controversy around her, but she also won an award for, basically sticking to the science despite controversy,
Okay, good for her.
Okay, and now people have different levels of susceptibility to this effect based on their own traits and qualities, things like their age. Okay, well, our brains work differently when we're 16 than they do when we're 68 or 90, right? So I can understand
Fastly
that.
approaching
It's
90.
sad. I am. I don't know about you. Working memory capacity, which is affected by sleep and stress and so many other things. But there's research about how many things we can keep in our mind. So, right? I think it's
Not very
7
many anymore.
is a limit. Is a pretty well researched
How
limit.
many?
7 items.
Oh, 7.
7. And so, if for example this were to happen with trying to remember a group of people, who was in the room, how many people were, if it was bigger than 7 people, it might be much harder to remember who was there than if there were only 2. Okay, that's an example. Personality traits. Some people tend to be less self-confident than others.
Or detail-oriented.
Okay. Or less detail-oriented.
See, I'm not detail-oriented, so I don't. And he is.
But think about
right.
the extremes of self-confidence and lack of self-confidence. So one person might be tend to not to doubt themselves, to be very, very certain that what they remember, what they know is right all the time. And another person might be very susceptible to being questioned. So if did it really happen like that? Oh no, maybe not. So. And so there are if that can enhance this effect. Also, language. Well, imagery abilities was another one. So if someone's a very visually oriented person, which the whole learning styles thing is BS, but different people are more visual than others. Maybe an artist, who's really has a trained eye to notice details. Right. Might remember visual details better than someone who's not. Okay. And then a second language. If a person is working, if the misinformation is presented in a language that's not their primary language, it actually enhances the effect of this in interfering with their memory.
I can understand that. Because you have to translate. So there's a lot lost in translation.
Yeah, and what's actually happening in the brain is, nobody really knows. I mean, they've got functional MRI studies. There's a lot of work that's been done, but there's still just theories.
Yeah.
So, but we do observe the effects, and we know what happens. Okay. So you mentioned the way a question is worded, and that and asking a question, and I gave an example of questioning someone's their certainty. Okay. Well, think about this. Someone witnesses a car accident.
Okay.
Right. The person that's asking, so say a police officer is asking for an estimate of how fast the cars were traveling. So one way of asking a question, about how fast were the cars going when they collided? Okay. Or, well, they're just asking for a guess. But think about, I'm going to give you 2 versions of the question. Okay. So that was the first version. About how fast were the cars going when they collided? Okay. The second version is, about how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? Now, this has been researched. So what would you think would happen in people's minds if they heard the 2 different questions?
Well, collision is one thing, yes. Being smashed, that's faster.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happened. When the words smashed was inserted in the question, their estimates of how fast the cars were going went up.
Yeah.
So you think about that in terms. Now we're not talking so much about memory in terms of like a survey, but people can word a survey question
exactly
to influence the answer.
Absolutely.
To get the answer they want.
Absolutely.
So this is an example of there are other cognitive biases like the priming, where we talked about that. If you give somebody a price of a car, I think it was, if the initial price was much higher and then you came down, a price that was actually above the true value of the car was still considered acceptable because they started at a higher price. So
and you could work your way down.
Putting that suggestion in somebody's mind, using the word smashed, is suggesting that they were really flying.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's interesting.
So how might this affect small business?
How might that?
Okay. Well, I would say a big one would be that people managers need to know that when two people that they're managing have different accounts of an event, it doesn't necessarily mean that one person is telling the truth and one is lying.
Oh, that's true.
Okay. And how many times have you in your life have you got two different people remembering two different things, and they're saying, well, this is how it happened. No, this is how it happened. And especially if the person that's doing the questioning is seeking to assign blame, and they have that authority,
and they've already kind of made up their mind.
Another big one, if they have an opinion, they're going to be asking that question like about smashed. So they're going to say, they may ask the question that suggests what they think happened. Right? You weren't paying attention, were you?
Remember that in school?
Asking neutral questions would be another thing that a people manager could do and also, so I just
no preconceived notion.
Now I just demonstrated this, but the next thing is EQ. We talk about emotional intelligence a lot. So how does EQ work into this? Well, self-awareness and self-management, those first two.
Right. We
need to have awareness of our feelings, awareness of our a larger emotional vocabulary, and then we need to know how to kind of moderate those emotions. Because when we have a strong emotional response to an event,
right, an attachment to the outcome,
it is going to change how we remember it.
Absolutely.
Some parts of it are going to stick out more and be more memorable. I don't want to talk about things being injured, but someone who has a particular love of animals, of pets, if they were seeing an event where a dog bit someone, okay, the person who's a dog lover might change their memory of the event, might shift differently than someone who was very afraid of dogs who saw the same event.
Right.
Okay.
I actually had that last week.
Other parts can fade or just be ignored because of our own emotional.
Well, and there again, we're working with limited information.
Always.
So that's another big key. And remember that you do not have the big picture.
This cognitive bias comes from the category of actually too much information. So we have to filter it. There's too much information.
Oh.
So and the way we filter is we want an easy takeaway and we want to throw away the rest.
Okay.
And so it's similar to not enough information because when we're remembering it, certainly when we're remembering it, we have already thrown away a bunch. We've picked out the parts that were memorable and saved those and thrown the rest away. So that's how you described it.
Okay.
So what can we do to avoid this cognitive bias?
Awareness.
We can't. I mean, we can. Awareness is the best.
That's the only thing. To understand that you're going into the situation uninformed, don't know anything. So
and our memory's not perfect, right? So
and nobody's memory is perfect.
The other thing, and because this has to do with information that comes after an event that changes our memory, knowing about this and when new information or a different viewpoint is presented to us or different information, being more critical of that, questioning that harder rather than just accepting it.
Well, and we're always want to be a hero in our own story.
And asking questions.
And we also are trying to CYA. So.
Yes, and so we have to be aware. That comes back to the EQ part of it.
Right.
So we're human. We do the best we can. But we certainly, this time of the digital world and AI and all the things that are, all the changes
all
that
the
are coming.
Stuff.
We just have to know that we're human and live with our humanness and make the best of it and give grace to other people who are also human.
Right.
So thank you so much for spending some time with us on the misinformation effect, and we'll see you in another video.
Bye.
Bye.